Moving on. The 6-minute one by Critical Drinker we might look at here. Animal Farm. They're coming out with some new thing. In a less weird time, I would maybe be fine with this. To be, I just don't have a lot of faith in Hollywood, so to speak, to do something like this right. But we'll go into that maybe.
Just when I think you couldn't possibly be any dumber, you go and do something like this.
I parked the car!
Let's have no one do that again.
Animal Farm.
Let us discuss the concept of death of the author, shall we, dear viewer? Based on the 1960s essay by the French literary critic Roland Barthes, it suggests that when it comes to assessing a piece of media, the original intent and ideas of the creator are less relevant than the individual perceptions and experiences of the audience.
Alright, guy.
Basically, it doesn't matter what
That's probably true-ish.
the creator of the work tried to say with it. Once it's released into the world, all that really matters is what you personally take from it.
That doesn't make sense.
And by golly, I do believe that Andy
Obscene.
Serkis is pushing that concept to its limits with his very unique take on Animal Farm, which, reimagines George...
There's a point to be made that I don't know if they could. The whole notion of doing Animal Farm as it was intended, having like the people who were initially the heroes turn into the villains, is going to be a really hard sell for a kids movie. It's not something I think they would do anymore. It's like having like the Wicked Witch, fall off a cliff into whatever, like particularly gruesome murders, or like the kind of, again in this scenario, having the people who start out as the heroes turn into the villains. It's not exactly something that they would want to do for like a Disney film, I guess, or in this case, an Angel Studios film. It's just kind of not on.
George Orwell's satirical critique of totalitarian communism and Stalin's cult of personality as a...
Sometime I want to finish the 1984, was it? I started it, got into it a little bit, but never finished it.
wacky contemporary animated comedy starring Seth Rogen,
Interesting premise, in any case.
where the real enemy is a tech billionaire who happens to drive a Cybertruck.
But she's a woman.
Right.
You know, I can't be 100% sure with this one, but I'm pretty confident we live in the worst timeline imaginable. Look, I'm not against the concept of adapting classic stories to fit with contemporary events, as
Glory. He looks crinkly.
long as they stay true to the original themes and ideas. Like Apocalypse Now took Joseph Conrad's novel Heart of Darkness, which was originally set in 19th century Africa, and transplanted it into 1960s Vietnam. It worked in that case because both stories dealt with the same basic ideas: the dehumanizing and corrupting nature of power, the loss of morality when the civilization that underpins it vanishes, the dangers of imperialism and colonialism. But what happens when you specifically set out to change...
Vietnam was, I think this is Vietnam or Korea or something, man. Those were some nasty wars. I think I had an uncle who was over there. Terrified of snakes now. Yeah, he had some sort of experience where he was... he was, I don't know, he was crawling or something. I don't know, he was, just really doesn't like snakes.
The very core of the story to deliver a completely different message than the one intended by the author. Well, you end up with Animal Farm, I guess. But why does it really matter? Well, it matters because Animal Farm just so happens to be one of the most iconic and widely referenced political satires ever written. A scathing critique of...
Again, like I was saying before, I don't think they would have the wherewithal to actually make a story where, like, okay, it's... in their minds, I think it would be almost too nuanced, too complex for kids to comprehend. So they would never make a story like that. Where it's like, okay, this is like the people who start out, they become the rulers, and then they become exactly what they overthrew. Like, I feel like, I don't know if Disney or like just modern Hollywood or movie makers would want to put that lesson or that, types and shadows type of thing into, well, it's not even types and shadows. I feel like they wouldn't want to put that into a kids movie, because kids movies have to be simplistic and they have to be boring and codified, formulaic. That's the right word, formulaic. There's a formula to it all.
Totalitarian communism and Stalin's cult of personality, and a pretty biting observation about human nature, our greed, our lust for power, and our willingness to compromise our moral principles for personal gain. In short, it's not really the sort of thing that lends itself to a goofy Seth Rogen kids comedy whose main message seems to be rich people bad. Maybe you should lead by example, Seth, and donate all that money you've got.
I agree. It's quite. It's quite ludicrous coming from people. you know what I was avoiding. It was quite ludicrous coming from people in Hollywood. The notion of we hate the rich, eat the rich, or whatever. I'm like, yeah, sure.
In the bank.
So the champagne socialist type. That's what we're dealing with here. That is an unsettling laugh. You ever hear Jimmy Fallon's laugh? That one's odd.
Now, you might find this hard to believe nowadays, but once upon a time, I actually used to read books, and George Orwell's works made quite the impression on teenage me, so I have to admit
I mostly listen to books these days.
I do have a certain attachment to Animal Farm. The original novella roughly follows the events of the Russian Revolution and the eventual rise of Stalin as sole dictator and the purges and totalitarianism that came with him. The animals of Manor Farm stage a rebellion against their corrupt and incompetent human overlords, i.e. the Russian aristocracy, and usher in a new society based on the promise of equality and freedom for all, as imagined by Old Major, basically a combination of Marx and Lenin, who dies before he can see his dream accomplished. In the power vacuum that follows, a pair of pigs, Napoleon and...
Again, not to get too involved in politics, it feels like communism just in general as like a form of governance of the masses is just... It's wishful thinking. And it generally ends up kind of with the same issues that it tries... Well, in this case, obviously, there's the story that kind of like... It feels like that is the cyclical nature of it. Like, you're just trading one type of tyranny for another type. It's like, oh, we have to try and get as much money as we can. Oh, no, now we just have to try to get as much, political power as we can. That's the new currency or whatever. Right. Right.
Snowball, Stalin and Trotsky fight for control of the farm until Snowball eventually gets pushed out and exiled and Napoleon becomes the supreme leader. The more time that passes, the more his rule devolves into a dictatorship as he purges the farm of his enemies, real or imagined, and keeps...
How could this have happened? Now, there's a weird thing where, like, it feels like... I tend to think it's good for the government to be a little bit afraid of the population. It's good for the population to be a little bit afraid of the government, right? In this case, the whole notion is that, like, you have the government who's already in control of, the military, judicial systems, police, to some extent the economy, but you're effectively, at this point, like, if you look at most communist regimes, end up doing this, where they give the government entire control over the economy, over ideology, over, like, social aspects of their life, as well as just the litigious or judicial aspects, as well as foreign affairs and whatnot. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? Giving them more power.
The population in perpetual fear and poverty, despite assuring them that they're better off than they were before. Eventually, he and the other pigs become so human in their behavior that they end up negotiating and trading with actual humans from other farms, walking around on two legs and hosting lavish parties while the rest of the animals watch.
Based. 2 legs is where it's at.
From outside. With all their greed and their lies and their lust for power, they've become the very thing they swore to overthrow. I mean, it's not exactly subtle, but in case you still don't get it, Orwell himself straight up explained multiple times what his intent was with Animal Farm. It was a straight up critique of Stalin.
Okay, so would have 1984 or whatever it was, would that have also been a kind of a critique of communism? Or is that something different? I have to look that up sometime. Or totalitarianism, or autocracies, or something.
and the authoritarianist dictatorships of the time, but more than that, it was a critique of the political ideals that brought them into existence in the first place. No matter how noble your intentions, and no matter how much you might promise freedom and equality, a new class of rulers and aristocrats is always going to rise up, just with different names. The cycle of revolution, corruption, and exploitation keeps repeating.
I think it is true that generally speaking, capable people will always rise to the forefront, even if it's not money that they're getting, even if it's just power or responsibility. It's always going to happen. People who are capable in a certain direction, or ambitious, or they can lead well, they're always going to be trusted to a greater degree than other people. They're always going to be brought to the forefront. They're always going to be asked to take on more responsibility. And to some extent, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like the best thing that democracy does really well is facilitate the peaceful transfer of power, so that when, not if, but when governments go bad, they can get those guys out relatively easily, right? It feels like, to my mind, that is actually the true marker of whether or not a system of government actually works well, is not how well it does when there's a good leader. Any system can work well when there's a good leader, actually, right? Arguably, some of them might do better when there's a good leader, because the leader can do more and they're not hampered by as much red tape and checks and balances and whatnot. But the problem is when, not if, the leadership goes bad, how easy is it to get them out of power? And at what point do you end up with heads on a pike outside the castle? You need some sort of almost violent uprising in some cases to overthrow that. So that's the one thing that I think democracy does really well, better than almost any other. It gets a lot less dicey in any case.
Because fundamentally, humans are not equal, and you can't force them to be. There's always going to be some arsehole who wants more
money, more resources, more power, and he's willing to break, exploit, or just
No, never mind.
straight
Enough
up
politics.
rewrite the rules to get what
Maybe.
he wants.
See.
It's all very interesting.
Seems like that's kind of what this one is wrapped up in. So we'll think that we're talking about politics in an abstract sense.
And stuff. The obvious problem these days, though, is twofold. One, the satire is kind of lost because most people now don't even have a functioning understanding of what the
And Hollywood is a group of commie dingalings. Okay. It's just I still find it ironic that they are, because they're the champagne socialist types. I don't know. I just feel like there's not a lot of self-awareness there, put it that way.
Russian Revolution was, never mind the finer details, the timeline of events, or the major players involved. And two, the idea of a Hollywood movie that suggests there might be a few problems with this whole social...
In this case, we might watch all of it just because it's we'll be done there. We'll be done there. All right. You can go check that out if you want. Animal Farm, this was probably a bad idea. For the record, I don't even know what Andy Serkis is. Has he done directing before? Is this one of his first projects, or I don't even know much about him as a person, which I enjoy. I'd like not to know more about him. We'll see how he does on this one, though. All right.